Good morning and welcome back to Iconic Freedom, the formula, where we are setting standards for responsibility, the ability to respond to your choices, and accountability, the ability to own what follows those choices. This week, I didn't have a clip. It was kind of strange. You know, I usually find something inspiring, and I didn't really this time, which I thought was very funny. And I thought, well, you know, back to basics, because I used to start my podcast like this. It took me months before I even started putting clips into my podcast. But I thought, you know, this week, you know, I'm diving into something a little bit different in terms of investigation, not into actions, not into motivations and self-interest, but into questions. And although there are motivations and self-interest in questions, more specifically, the kinds of questions that we ask, and not the why, but the when, where, how, that kind of thing, and what. But let's be honest, okay, some questions are asked to seek truth, others are asked in order to avoid, right? And this is what I'm calling the forensics of questions. So the emotional versus the intellectual. Let's start with the obvious. So emotional questions will usually sound like, why would they do this to me? You know how the why question is a never-ending story, right? Or how could they be so unfair? Why does this always happen? There's another why question. But what's interesting to me is when a person starts going down that road, where they start asking the why or how could this happen to me, they're really not taking ownership because they're thinking that life is happening outside of them. And that is not the case, right? It's happening inside. But, you know, really what's happening when people are asking these questions, you know, they truly are seeking some sort of validation. You know, they're not really seeking a solution. They're chasing their feelings, not a functionality of their life and the choices that they made. And often, and I'm sure you've experienced this before, is they'll drag you back into a story that doesn't even serve in terms of forward momentum, right? Now, what's interesting is that in contrast, the intellectual questions are grounded in reality. What is reality? Reality is the observation that you're seeing something and it is absent of emotion. What happened? What am I responsible for? What is the correct next step for me? What is it that I noticed? What is it that I saw? Did I have a small little inkling of an emotion or feeling that was telling me to pay attention to something? What's very interesting about these two things is that the intellectual, in a sense, I mean, because we've talked about how the brain is the dumbest part of us. So let's say the body, okay, for lack of a better term, the body knows, right? So the body is always paying attention. It's always processing things. It's not always bringing things to your consciousness, but it is acting within your universe. But those questions, what happened? What am I responsible for? What is the correct next step for me? Those are very clean. They're very simple. They honor the reality, if you will, and not the emotion. Imagine if you're like on a sinking ship. You don't ask, you know, like, why did the waves choose me? You know, you sit there and you ask, you know, where's the life raft? You know, where's the, you know, the life raft or the lifeboat? You know, that's the difference between emotional and intellectual questions. Emotional questions will trap you inside an experience, where intellectual questions, in a sense, they will move you through the situation and they will support you in being able to go to the next step and the next step. You know, I say at the beginning of this that accountability is, you know, that ability to own what follows, because in this loop of choice, right? The loop of choice is that, you know, then you make another choice and another choice and another choice. Okay, but let's go a little deeper. Okay, so psychology and therapy, we know what a fan of that I am. So they tried to find healing people by asking why about everything. And so much of it was because, then everybody's going to tell a story. And when they're telling their story, they come up with excuses and they go off in different directions. And what are they doing? They're trying to tug at people's emotions in order to influence them. And in order to influence them, then they are manipulating. And through the manipulation, they are controlling the outcome or attempting to control the outcome. So when why doesn't change the outcome, it doesn't matter. When why doesn't change the outcome, it doesn't matter. In fact, the only purpose of going down why in many cases is to delay a correct response. So I like that phraseology, right? That the purpose of going down the why rabbit hole basically is to delay the correct response. And I don't even want to just say the correct response, it's to delay the reality. The reality that is the observation absent of the emotion. It sounds very introspective. In a lot of ways, it probably is. But really, it's just often the resistance. So no resistance, just information, no rejection, just redirection. So the thing that I find interesting is that when people keep going down this why rabbit hole, they really are just trying to manipulate. So we don't ask people to tell us about the facts of a situation. We ask them to tell how they feel about it. If you will watch on, a lot of news shows and stuff, they'll say, well, this happened and this happened. They start with all the facts. This happened and that happened. How did that make you feel? What did you feel about that? As if that is anything of substance to give us an idea of what this story is, right? When you think about it, it's just more distraction, because the facts of what is going on is what's going to get you to a solution. It's going to get you to the resolution that ultimately you are looking for. So we live in this world that, just loves a backstory. One of my friends, I actually tease him about it sometimes. I said, sounds like you're creating a backstory there, buddy. And what's really interesting about that is that it robs you, when you start creating a backstory, it robs you of the opportunity to see the reality, to hear the reality, to observe the reality that's in front of you. If a person starts making up a backstory when you're telling a story to them, or you're explaining to them what happened, what occurred, the what, when, how, and where, they start to ignore all the details of what you're saying, which contribute to the factual observation to be had, because they're making up a story, and the story then is always tied to emotion. So I'm going to say that again. The story is always tied to an emotion when you create a backstory, and it's not tied to the factual information. And again, you rob yourself of that opportunity and that observation when you're doing that. So, behavior is observable, right? I talk about observation, how powerful that is. And you don't need to know why someone acts the way they do. You just want to make sure that you're responding in clarity from your observations, and you're being responsible and accountable in your choices. Don't get lost in their story. Don't over-identify with the emotion. And I think that is such a manipulation, is that, situations, people, movies, television, whatever, they want to have us identify with the emotion. And then you find yourself thinking that you're living that emotion. I know for years growing up as a kid, I was doing that all the time. I was identifying with people's emotions, and then I was trying to live them out. It's like, wait, that's like insanity. It's like, first of all, you're a little kid. What are you doing that for? But you're watching adults respond to the emotions in a movie, in a TV show, in a play, in a musical. You're watching them respond in such a way, and you're thinking, if I do the same thing, that's how people are going to respond to me. They're going to save me, or they're going to love me, or they're going to hug me, or they're going to like me. And do you see how manipulative that is when we get caught up in that emotion? So don't get lost in the story. Don't over-identify. Don't spiritualize or provide some sort of psychology of everything that could be just simply, almost a boundary breach, right? It's like, you are who you are. You're living in your own universe. And you don't need people to breach your boundary of reality by trying to elicit emotion from you, or trying to get you to over-identify with the emotion. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was, so this next piece I want to talk about is, and I took some notes on this, so I kind of liked it. But when you get stuck in that emotional questioning, why me? Why now? Why again? Okay, so I've talked about that's a person avoiding the responsibility. They're thinking life is happening to them instead of because of them and the choices that they make and owning the outcomes that follow, right? But like I said earlier, where you rob yourself of the opportunity of an observation of something when you start emotionalizing and you start making up a backstory, but you also paralyze yourself. You turn your feelings into a full-time job. I mean, when you think about it, there are people out there that it's like their full-time job is just to be emotional. And every time you go on TV or the radio or a podcast, everybody's outraged, everybody's upset. This is unbelievable. And it's like, okay, it can't be that way all the time. That's not life. And so what you're noticing is that people are just being emotional because they have not understood and they have not developed the skills to not be that, because that's all they have utilized in their world. They have over-identified with emotion their whole life, and they have paralyzed themselves with emotion, and they start creating a backstory, and they no longer can hear the reality. They no longer can see the reality. Why? Because reality has to be void of emotion. You see how that's a wicked, circular thing that goes on for people? That the only way you're going to get to reality is to be out of your emotion. But if you have paralyzed yourself in emotion and you have paralyzed yourself in a backstory and over-identifying with emotion with everyone, you're never going to get to reality. So you got to take the step back. You got to be able to look at it and say, this is not reality. What is reality? It's void of emotion. And then start identifying the emotions for yourself. This is what anger, annoyance, happiness, joy, sentiment, love, that's what all these things feel like inside of me. And they're tiny little indicators to let me know that I'm enjoying something or I'm not enjoying something. And then I can manage my world. I can make my choices. I can own my choices. There's accountability, whatever follows. And then I'll own that. And in the choice loop, I go back to what's the next choice that I make after all of that. You don't need all the answers to move on. I want to say this again. I think this is so important. You don't need all the answers to move on. You just need clarity for yourself on whatever the next step is. So here's a few questions, right? Are you asking questions that delay action? Are you asking why questions because you're distracted and you don't want to face the reality? Because you have over-identified with people's emotions and you're trying to distract yourself from the reality? I don't know. Is your reality uncomfortable? Is it something you're trying to avoid? And are your questions that you ask other people or that you experience for yourself, are they built to understand something? I'm trying to understand what 4 plus 4 is. And so somebody tells you factually, this is what it looks like, or they give you examples or how you can make that happen. Or are you asking questions so that you could escape? You're asking emotional questions because, that's, I like the escape rather than the reality of what's going on. And then wherever you can swap a why, maybe you try to ask, what now? Instead of asking, why did that happen to me? Now that that's happened, what now? Now that that's happened, what now? What am I responsible for? What is the next correct step for me, in a sense of, what now? I hope this has been helpful to you. I really think that what happens when we are listening to people ask questions, if we can start to identify, is this person asking me an emotional question or is this person asking me a factual question? And the more you engage in the factual questions, the more you will get to solutions. Your emotions will not bring you solutions. I know that seems antithetical to what a society that wants you to go with your heart, feel with your heart, blah, blah, blah. Your emotions will not get you to a solution. Your emotions will trigger you into factual observation so that you can make choices that bring clarity for what's next, and then what's next, and then what's next. So I didn't really get a clip today to be able to use, but I hope you enjoyed this. This episode is your reminder that you don't need a backstory to act with integrity. You don't need the whole picture to be responsible. You just need a response that's rooted in reality. You need a choice that is rooted in reality. So if you are distracting yourself with a backstory, if you are paralyzing or robbing yourself of reality because you'd rather feel something than see the reality, then you have to ask yourself, what is it about my desire or my drive to avoid? Like this episode, share it with your family and friends. You never know if it's going to be able to help them in their journey as well as your own. Subscribe if you'd like to. The links are down below. And of course, send it to somebody that you think might, need to stop asking why and start asking what now. And as always, all the fun links are down below. Let each care for self and all will be cared for. Until next time, stay sharp and stay sovereign. I'll see you next week.